So, hello everyone. Today I'm so excited to be joined by Dr. Georgia Eid. Dr. Eid is a Harvard trained, board certified psychiatrist and nutritional and metabolic psychiatry kind of pioneer. She recently released her book, Change Your Diet, Change Your Mind, which I highly recommend checking out. I listened to the audiobook of this and it was so wonderful. And I learned so much. She also has a really great free resource available at diagnosisdiet.com, where you can learn more about her work and different resources around nutritional and metabolic psychiatry and brain health. And there's also a free clinician directory, which I've kind of pointed people toward in the past as well, which is wonderful. But I'm so excited to be joined by Dr. Eid. Dr. Eid, thank you so much for being here today with us.
It's a pleasure, Lauren. Thank you very much for inviting me.
So in this first video, I think we're kind of going to be trying to go over a kind of guide to formulating the right brain healthy diet for each individual person. That's a big part of what you talk about in your book. And so I guess maybe to start off with, can you go over a little bit, what is a brain healthy diet? What does that mean?
Yeah, so we talk a lot about heart healthy diets and diets for weight loss and diets to manage cholesterol levels and prevent diseases. We don't usually think about what a brain healthy diet should look like. And that's what I have worked hard in the book to explain to people, is that there are a lot of myths around what a brain healthy diet should look like. When people think about a brain healthy diet, they might think about superfoods like blueberries or oatmeal or chia seeds or flax seeds. They might think about, rainbows of fruits and vegetables. They might think about plant-based diets. They might think about supplements. They might think about avoiding things like red meat and saturated fat to reduce the risk of problems later on. But really, most of those things are not useful. And so many people who think that they have been doing everything they can around diet, they think, well, I've tried a lot of brain healthy changes. I've already tried taking the sugar out of my diet, or I've tried, eating more whole grains, or I've tried eating more fruits and vegetables, or adding superfoods, or making smoothies in the morning, that sort of thing. And they don't notice much, if any, difference. And so they think that diet doesn't matter. And the reason I wrote the book is because dietary changes can be a very powerful mental health treatment, as you know more than most people do, Lauren. But you have to know, it can be much more powerful even than medication. It can change brain chemistry in ways that no medication can. But you have to know which dietary changes are the ones that are most worth making. And most of them are not the ones we're used to hearing about. So we're talking not just about the types of foods to include and exclude from the diet, or a lot of those will be different from what a lot of people have heard, but also, how to think about the powerful relationship between your metabolic health and your mental health. So these two pieces, the dietary quality and the nutritional quality of the foods you eat, which foods are best for you, and which foods are going to energize your brain best by keeping your glucose and insulin levels in a healthy range. When you marry those two pieces together, the nutritional piece and the metabolic piece, you get a very powerful mental health intervention.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. I think that, there's so much information out there about what it means to follow a healthy diet. And some of the things that you pointed out are things we're told are good for our brain. And so you try those interventions and they don't really do much. And so I think there is this kind of shirking off of the advice to, work on your nutrition to better things like your mental health. So yeah, I would love to dig in deeper to what do you actually do? How do you get into this? So in your book, Change Your Diet, Change Your Mind, you do provide somewhat of a roadmap for trying out various ways of eating that do promote brain health. Can you walk us through that a little bit?
Yes. So the roadmap in part 4 of the book is all how to. And it offers several different dietary strategies for people as a starting point, and various paths you can take along the way, depending on your dietary preferences, your goals, your current health situation, a variety of other, and your metabolic health, things like that. So it's very, there is a map, but it's also allows for a lot of personalization along the way. So the diet that I start with as a foundation as a recommendation for everyone is a modified version of a so-called paleo diet. Paleo diet is what people may think of as, sort of a hunter-gatherer diet, a very old ancestral diet, goes back before agriculture, before 10,000 years ago, very long time. It seems like a long time ago, but in our evolutionary history, it's actually a very short period of time. So we haven't been eating agricultural staples like grains and beans and even dairy products for very long. It's about 1% of our history have we been doing that. So we go back to the whole foods that we evolved over many hundreds of thousands of essentially 2 million years eating before we started farming and domesticating animals. So that paleo diet, it's just whole foods that you would find in nature that are appealing and edible. So these are meats and seafoods and poultries and eggs and nuts, fruits, vegetables, any whole food that you can find in nature that doesn't require a lot of processing to make it safe or palatable. So I start there, and I start there rather than with a Mediterranean diet. The Mediterranean diet is the one that a lot of people think of as healthiest for the brain, especially for preventing dementia or treating depression, because we do have 3 high quality, what are called randomized controlled trials of the Mediterranean diet showing that it can help with moderate to severe depression. And that's absolutely true. And that's wonderful. That's really good evidence that diet matters in depression. But, just because the Mediterranean diet is better than the standard diet that most people are eating, and that's what it's compared to, doesn't necessarily mean it's the best diet for the brain. And there are lots of other diets too we could talk about. So, many diets outperform the standard diet, including the Mediterranean diet. But the reason I start with the paleo diet is because if you look at the biology of the foods and the biology of the brain and what you're trying to accomplish to nourish and protect and energize the brain, it makes more biological sense to start with a paleo diet than it does to start with a Mediterranean diet.
So why is that? What is the difference between the Mediterranean and the paleo that makes the paleo better for that?
Yeah, so people may be familiar with Mediterranean diet. It's kind of if you think about a pyramid, then the base of the pyramid is a lot of grains and beans and breads and pastas and cereals. It's a very starchy base. And then you have the Mediterranean diet does include lean animal foods, things like seafood and lean red meats and poultry and even eggs, low-fat dairy products and non-fat dairy products. So there are animal foods included in this pyramid. And there are lots of fruits and vegetables included in the pyramid as well. And it asks people to go easy on sweets and processed foods. It also recommends that people include red wine in their diet. So you'll see this grain-heavy triangle with a glass of red wine perched next to it. So that's kind of what it's supposed to look like. And so there are a number of problems, and then it's definitely healthier than the diet we eat now because it's a lot lower in processed foods and does emphasize whole foods to a certain extent. But I think we can do a lot better because this diet, the Mediterranean diet, there's several major red flags in the Mediterranean diet. So one is it's very high in carbohydrate. So, and not just whole food carbohydrates like beans and whole grains, but even refined carbohydrates like breads and cereals and pasta, things made of flour. So I think most people can understand in this day and age that refined carbohydrates are not healthy for us because they're really naked glucose molecules that turn rapidly into, glucose in the bloodstream. And they can give you unhealthy spikes in your blood sugar and unhealthy spikes in your insulin levels. And all of that affects brain metabolism as well. So first of all, most of us have something called insulin resistance. We have trouble processing carbohydrates safely without getting these spikes in our glucose and insulin levels. So the starchy base for most of us is not a safe foundation for our diet. And then, of course, red wine is not a brain healthy beverage. It's a toxic, addictive liquid, that there are no studies demonstrating that adding more wine to your diet is going to be good for you. So we can set that aside. And then the other important issue, I think, with the Mediterranean diet is that it discourages, it's not just that the grains and beans and flours and cereals that are the base of the diet are high in carbohydrate. They're also not very nutritious. So, in fact, they have a lot of molecules in them that work against your good nutrition that can actually make it harder for you to absorb nutrients. So you're really basing your diet on foods that are some of the least nutritious plant foods you can choose, and some of the riskiest as well. So if you're trying to create a brain healthy diet using biology and logic, what you would do is you would make the foundation of your diet some of the most nutritious, nourishing, and safest, lowest risk foods available. And those actually are meat, seafood, poultry, and eggs, which is the opposite of what we're told. So right. If you want to nourish your brain, the brain needs all essential nutrients. So you want to make sure the foods that you're feeding yourself can deliver those essential nutrients to the brain safely and effectively. And that they're not going to overwhelm your glucose and insulin levels. And because if your glucose and insulin levels are running too high, lots of problems can occur for brain chemistry very quickly.
Right. Thank you for that explanation. That makes a lot more sense. So your recommendation for anyone is really to start with a paleo format diet. What if that is not giving you the benefits you're needing or wanting in terms of your mental health experience or symptoms? What would you recommend going to next?
Yeah, so the roadmap starts with a kind of a moderate carbohydrate paleo diet. And that will help quite a few people, especially younger people, people who are more active, physically active, and people who haven't had a lot of metabolic damage yet. Oftentimes, especially children and teens, this is a great starting place. This is a great diet for children and teens. And so it's just kind of the basic human diet. It makes sense to start there. But what if, as you said, this doesn't help you very much, or it doesn't help you at all? The next step on the roadmap is to consider a ketogenic version of that same dietary pattern. So bringing the carbohydrates down to, depending on your metabolic tolerance, which I help you figure out in the book, or we can talk about together, it doesn't matter. Then you want to bring those carbohydrates down so that down to the level that your ketones, that the insulin levels will come down low enough to turn on ketone production. So burn fat and turn on ketone production. And that those ketones will then dissolve in the bloodstream, and they will cross into the brain where they can help energize the brain. Because most people with insulin resistance actually have trouble turning using blood glucose for energy. Their brain glucose processing has become sluggish. And so they really need a supplemental fuel source, and ketones are the ideal choice for that. So if you can, so paleo, moderate carbohydrate paleo, then gradually down to a ketogenic paleo diet. If you're a good candidate for that, there are some people for whom that's not going to be a good idea. But in most cases, it turns out that it's well worth considering. There aren't that many people who really need to avoid doing a ketogenic diet. It really is appropriate for most people with medical and psychiatric supervision, of course. Right. And then if that doesn't help enough, you can consider even a carnivore diet temporarily or longer term to see if that will bring you even more relief.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you. So you also outline in your book what you refer to as quiet versions of each of these diets. So can you describe more what exactly that means and why it can be of additional benefit?
Yes. So the three foundation, the three basic plans in the book, paleo, keto, carnivore, a lot of people have heard of the standard versions of those diets, and I absolutely recommend those are great places to start. If you haven't already tried a standard paleo or standard keto or standard carnivore diet and you're curious about those, that's absolutely wonderful. What I've done in the book, though, is taken those diets a little bit further. I've removed some of the foods from the standard versions of those diets to make them a little quieter. So quieter on your insulin levels, quieter on your immune system, on your gut. They're easier to digest, on your nervous system. And so these diets are modified in these unique ways to give people the best chance of results most efficiently without a lot of trial and error. Because a lot of people will, if they, let's say you start a paleo diet and it doesn't help you much or it makes you feel worse, you may have to do a lot of troubleshooting to figure out, well, is there something in this diet that I'm not tolerating, or why is this not working for me? So I've taken my many years of study of nutrition and clinical experience with lots of different troublesome cases and sort of poured that into the book so that people can, if they want to, if they've already tried the standard versions, or if they're just curious to take the fastest possible path to recovery, potential recovery, to follow these quieter versions of these diets.
So what kind of things are involved or what are removed in the quiet version of these diets? Are some examples of what you would take out and why?
So one of the examples is nuts. So nuts we think of as very healthy, and they are nutritious, and they so they certainly can be, and they're certainly very compatible. Most types of nuts are very compatible even with a ketogenic diet. Most nuts don't have a lot of carbohydrate in them, and they're very satisfying and they're convenient. So I definitely think that if people tolerate nuts, that's great. But one of the reasons I've taken out nuts is that they are very hard to digest. And a lot of people with gut damage, a lot of food sensitivities, may have difficulty with nuts, either digesting them or tolerating them from a food sensitivity and allergy perspective, because nuts are one of the, what are called the big 9 common food allergens in the United States. So nuts are removed from these quieter plans. The nightshades are removed, the nightshade family of fruits and vegetables. And this is because nightshades, and these are eggplants, white potatoes, especially the skins of white potatoes, and tomatoes and peppers, and even goji berries. This nightshade family, which sounds at first like they have nothing in common. If you look at them, if the fruit of those plants, they all wear this same little green elfish hat on top. So if you picture an eggplant, it has that cute little cap on top. That's a clue that it's a nightshade. And the nightshades do contain natural neurotoxins, chemicals that that plant family uses to defend itself from predators, which happen to be toxic to the nervous system. And so I think that it makes sense to exclude those, especially in the beginning, if you're trying to, experience the fastest results. Those are a couple of examples. Another example would be, so if we look at the animal foods, another example is the foods that are high in histamine, the processed meats. So things like bacon and salami and smoked salmon. And aged cheeses, anything that is any animal food that isn't strictly fresh, because people with a lot of gut damage or something called histamine intolerance, and this is especially more common in middle-aged women and older, because there are some hormonal influences there as well. But it's actually a much more common issue than a lot of people realize. And this problem called histamine intolerance means you have less of an ability to neutralize the amino acids that accumulate in the food as it's aging or being smoked or cured or processed. And so if that animal food isn't strictly fresh, it could give you symptoms, because then you can absorb more of that than you should because you're not neutralizing it well. And I've seen histamine intolerance cause all kinds of psychiatric issues, things like panic attacks, insomnia, profound fatigue, migraine headaches, depression. Lots of different things can happen for people because histamine, as it's piling up in that food, as it's aging, it's a powerful neurotransmitter. And if you're not able to neutralize it before it crosses into your bloodstream, then you could feel unwell for a short period of time, or even sometimes up to 24 hours. So these are a few examples of some of the things I've set aside in these quieter plans. But I also want to emphasize that if people do feel better with one of these plans, I also encourage them, especially if they are missing that variety, to gradually try expanding their diet to see where their personal safe outer limit is. Because you don't want the diet to be more restrictive than it needs to be.
Right. And I really appreciate, I've heard you say in other interviews that it's going to be kind of different for everyone, and everyone is going to need to work to tailor it to their own specific needs, preferences, whatever it may be, or what best impacts their mental health. And so I'm wondering, how will someone know what is working best for them? Is it kind of more the qualitative experience, or are there more concrete biomarkers a person can look to see which diet is most effective for them?
Well, when it comes to the food choices, when it comes to the ketogenic diet, that's a different story, as you know very well, and we can come back to that. But when it comes to the actual, food sensitivities and food tolerances and the mix of foods that's going to be right for one person versus another, it really is the qualitative experience. We don't, as far as I know, have any biomarkers that can help you understand whether or not a particular mix of foods is working for you. But what I say to my patients, and I used to say this even long time ago when my practice was exclusively medication and psychotherapy oriented. The first 10 years of my practice, I practiced conventional psychiatry, medications and psychotherapy only. And I say the same thing about diet that I still do and have always said about medications, is that if you can't tell it's working, it's not working. And so you want there to be meaningful, noticeable improvement that makes it feel to you as though it's worth it to continue eating this way. If you can't really tell, then why go to these lengths to clean up your diet in these particular ways? Right. I think it's hard enough to change diet, even if it's helping. But if you're not really sure it's helping, then it's hard to really be sold on it.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. I think a lot of people are looking at this keto and metabolic health project and just thinking, why would you put yourself through this? It doesn't seem worth it. But, when you actually go through that experience of your mental health improving so drastically and basically your quality of life improving, it is absolutely worth it. And so, yeah, I guess that is a good metric to figure out which one is working best for you, which one feels worth it to adhere to.
Well, you are a living example of this, Lauren, in that, yes, in order to achieve potential benefits, mental health benefits and physical health benefits, which come along as great side benefits of these dietary changes, it's not easy to make these changes, right? And you have to give up a lot of things that are quite enjoyable and convenient and fun, to eat, that most of us grew up on and really miss eating. It's not easy. But another thing I say to my patients all the time is, behind every no is a yes. So when you're saying no to cake, or when you're saying no to candy or cookies or juice or whatever it is you miss the most, bread, a lot of people really miss bread. And there are substitutes for these things if you really miss them that much. When you're saying no to this, what are you saying yes to by saying no to this thing? And everyone's going to have a different reason, a different why. And so, and it's really important to identify that. One of the things I walk people through in the book is, before you start making changes to your diet, take stock of where you are now. I mean, really take the time to write down or journal or record in some way how you're really doing right now and what things you wish could change, so that you don't forget what it's like before you make those changes, and to really spell out for yourself in very vivid detail what you are hoping to accomplish and what you wish your life could look like, what you wish could be different. And that's going to be your that's going to be your guiding star, because there are going to be days when it's going to be hard and you think, well, why can't I just have a little bit of that? Well, you could. It's your choice. These are all choices. But it really helps to keep your eye on the prize. Okay, why am I doing this again? Because it can take a while, as you know too, it can take a while to start to feel better. And temptations are all around us. It's very hard to eat a healthy, low carbohydrate diet in an unhealthy, high carbohydrate world. And so, it takes strength and stamina and perseverance and character. Builds character, as Matt Bazuki said. I think that's a really, really beautiful statement. It's things that are worth doing are hard, but when you accomplish them, the pride you feel, the ownership you can take in your own recovery is I think a completely different feeling from the way people feel when they improve on a medication.
I mean, I love that you're talking about that, because I think that has been a huge part of this experience, is really the feeling of feeling empowered and taking ownership over my own health and well-being and improving my mental health in ways that I get to choose every day to work on. And I think that's really wonderful. And I appreciate hearing your perspective on that as well. So I guess moving into, you mentioned a lot about blood sugar levels and insulin levels and whatnot being a big factor in terms of this and what nutrition is going to ultimately help promote brain healthy metabolism. I think, though, that probably a lot of people watching, and even myself, I didn't even really know what is insulin resistance. Can you explain a little bit more, break that down for people who may be watching and thinking, what does that even mean?
Yeah, so the majority of Americans and a growing number of people around the world, as well as we've exported our extraordinarily unhealthy industrialized diet to all four corners of the planet, the majority of us now have this thing called insulin resistance, and it goes by other names too: pre-diabetes, high insulin levels. The technical term for that is hyperinsulinemia, too much insulin, and sometimes people will call it metabolic syndrome, which is just a cluster of problems that can happen if you have insulin resistance. These are things like obesity, especially a large stomach. So your waist circumference looks a little larger than it should compared to the rest of your body. You gain weight around the middle. High blood pressure is a feature of metabolic syndrome, and cardiovascular disease is another feature. Fatty liver, which can make your waist look even larger if your liver is enlarged with fat. So and risk for certain types of cancer. Lots of different things. So metabolic syndrome, prediabetes, insulin resistance, high insulin levels, these are all the same thing. And really, it's just all about your insulin levels running too high. It's our high insulin lifestyle that has gotten us into so much trouble when it comes to mental health as well as physical health. And there's a whole chapter in the book that describes all of the different familiar conditions that we think of as normal aging or genetically predetermined that we have no control over. Most of the conditions that we fear, physical and mental, are rooted in high insulin levels and insulin resistance. So it's a very scary condition, but so easy to turn around if you have the right information. You can change your insulin levels in a matter of days to weeks if you have the right information. So, but what is it? So when insulin is a hormone. So when insulin levels are running too high, which they will be if your lifestyle is a high insulin lifestyle, which means you're eating too many of the wrong carbohydrates too often, or just too much carbohydrate for your metabolism, or you're just eating too many times per day, or you're eating too much food, even if it's low carb food, if you're not getting enough exercise. All these different things will have your insulin levels running too high. So when your insulin levels run too high, just like it would be for any hormone that's too high, your cells, all of your cells in your brain and the rest of your body have insulin receptors on their surfaces to listen to insulin's messages. Insulin's a powerful metabolic hormone. It's giving instructions to all of your cells about what they're going to do with the food you're eating. It's really a master metabolic hormone. So if your insulin levels are running too high, your cells will naturally, this is a natural, healthy response to an unhealthy situation, they will start toning down their response to insulin. they'll start tuning insulin out to protect themselves from being overstimulated by that insulin. And this is a normal, natural thing that happens with any hormone. This can happen with thyroid hormone. It can happen with testosterone, any kind of hormone. So now that's called insulin resistance, that the cells are trying to protect themselves. They're blunting their response to insulin. They're kind of putting their hands over there and saying, too much. So when that happens, insulin doesn't work as well. And that's a problem because insulin is really important to everything the cell is doing all day long and all night long. So if your insulin isn't working well, your body turns up the signal and says, hey, you're not listening. Let's make more insulin and try to get our messages through. And so you get this vicious cycle of the more insulin you have, the more insulin resistant you become, and you need more and more insulin for insulin to work properly. And it becomes harder and harder for insulin to do all the things it's supposed to do, including keeping your blood sugar in a normal range, which eventually, it will do it for years and years and years. It will just keep climbing to keep that blood sugar in a normal range until it just can't do it anymore. And the system is so broken, the insulin system, signaling system becomes so broken that the blood sugar is out of control all the time. It just can't, no matter how hard it tries, it can't get the blood sugar back down. That's type 2 diabetes. And so that's in the body. But in the brain, what's happening is something very different. So the glucose in your bloodstream, which the brain does need some glucose at all times to operate at full capacity. That's true. So you need some glucose from your bloodstream, and that's going to keep waltzing in, no questions asked, even if you have very severe insulin resistance, even if you have type 2 diabetes. What's going to have a harder and harder time getting in if you have insulin resistance is the insulin. The insulin in your bloodstream is going to have a harder time crossing into the brain. And that's a huge problem because your brain can't use glucose properly and turn it into as much energy without adequate insulin. So you can now have a brain swimming in a sea of glucose and still be slowly starving to death. And that is a very dire predicament. And that lays the groundwork for all kinds of mental health problems, not just Alzheimer's disease, but most of the mental health conditions that we have looked at, you see signs of either insulin resistance or this sluggish brain glucose processing. And so this is a wonderful, as scary as that is, we know how simple, and it's not easy, but it's simple, to lower your glucose levels into a healthy range, to lower your insulin levels into a healthy range, to bring the insulin levels down low enough that you can turn on fat burning and generate ketones from that fat that can bridge that energy gap and solve, in a lot of cases, sluggish brain glucose processing in a matter of days to weeks. This is a really powerful strategy.
That was a fantastic explanation. It makes a lot of sense as to why nutritional interventions that can help lower blood sugar or insulin levels are effective in managing symptoms of mental illness. So thank you for that explanation. I think that something that a lot of people are concerned about with diets like the ketogenic diet or paleo or carnivore or whatever this dietary changes are, is that kind of wondering if this diet that is geared toward improving brain health is going to also benefit your health as well, your physical health as well, or is it going to harm other aspects of your health? A lot of people are worried about these high-fat diets impacting heart health or stuff like that. And so can you speak a bit to what that effect can be?
Yes, thank you for asking that question. It's a very common fear that, okay, if I buy this idea that a ketogenic diet is good for the brain, will I be compromising other aspects of my health? And so thankfully, the answer is absolutely not. It wouldn't make sense for different organs in your body to require different diets. All of our cells require the same basic nutritional care. So that wouldn't make any sense to design a creature that needed to eat different diets for every different part of its body. So now the belief that, or the myth that eating more fat makes you fat, or that eating fat raises your cholesterol levels and therefore is going to clog your arteries in your heart. There is no scientific evidence for those beliefs. Study after study after study, decades of research. People have been trying to pin the tail on this donkey for a very long time. And there's no evidence. It's a belief grounded in fears and sort of, I guess I would say kind of, it sounds logical, right? It sounds logical that if you eat more fat, you're going to get fat, or that because we see cholesterol in these plaques in the heart when people have heart attacks, it makes sense to think, well, maybe the cholesterol caused the arteries to slam shut. It makes sense if you think, oh, it makes sense if I eat fat, I'm going to get fat. That all sounds logical, but it's just not the way the body works. So, for example, the belief that eating more fat makes you fat. It's not that the amount of fat you eat doesn't matter. It's that that's not the primary driver of fat storage. The primary driver of fat storage is insulin. So when insulin is high, and remember, carbohydrates raise insulin the most. Protein raises it also to a decent extent, but carbohydrates even more so. And refined carbohydrates, sugars, flours, cereals, juices, things like that, raise insulin levels the most of any food ingredient that you could eat. So when insulin levels are high, fat burning turns off. The enzymes that burn fat turn off. It's almost as, you cannot burn fat if your insulin levels are too high. When in order to burn fat, you must lower your insulin levels to a relatively low point. And when you do that, fat burning enzymes switch on. It's as simple as that. So anything you do that raises insulin levels is going to shut down your fat burning machinery. Anything that lowers insulin levels is going to switch it on. And so a ketogenic diet switches it on, but fasting also switches it on. Exercise can switch it on. And even calorie restriction can switch it on. You can eat a relatively high carbohydrate diet, but if you eat a very low calorie, high carbohydrate diet, if you get your calories down to say 725 calories per day or less, which is not easy to sustain for long periods of time, all of those strategies will lower your insulin levels and turn fat burning on. So it's not fat that makes you fat, it's your hormones, it's your hormonal signaling. And the foods you eat tell your hormones what to do. So a lot of us think, oh, well, I'm eating because I'm hormonal, or I'm eating because I have emotional eating going on. And yes, our hormones do tell us, when to eat, when not to eat. But the foods we choose also are giving information to our hormones. So it's a two-way street. We have a lot more control over our hormones than we realize.
Right. I think that's an important distinction, where some people are maybe coming at this with the assumption that eating high fat is going to be harmful. And yes, it is if you're also eating high carb, because then the insulin levels are out of control and whatnot. But if you're reducing that and controlling the insulin, then it's going to have a lot of metabolic benefit to be eating the high fat diet. That's an important clarification.
Precisely. Yeah. Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Eid, for joining us to kind of give a starting point, I guess, for people to figure out how to formulate a diet that is going to be the best brain healthy diet for them. Would really encourage anyone listening to check out Dr. Eid's book, Change Your Diet, Change Your Mind. It goes over all of this in far more detail, and it was a fantastic read. I learned so much. Also pointing you all in the direction of her website, diagnosisdiet.com. It's an amazing free resource with lots of information, and also that clinician directory if you want to help, or if you want to find a clinician who can help you use some of these nutritional interventions in your own management of your mental illness. So thank you so much, Dr. Eid, for joining us today. It was wonderful hearing from you.
Thank you very much, Lauren.